Hey, what's up guys? Jerry here, aka Barnacules, and today we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Windows exploits that were taken advantage of by the NSA and how they accidentally leaked the tools that they created to violate these exploits to the hacker group known as shadow brokers, and then later how these tools became available to the public and if you should be concerned. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I was a senior software developer in the Microsoft Windows division at Microsoft for 15 years. So I'm intimately familiar with the source code itself and the storage practices of that source code. And I'm going to talk a little bit to the fact of how these exploits become public later in this video. Now, the first thing I would like to say is you don't have to worry. The initial headlines that you saw jumped the gun and were based on some initial testing that was done on old plain vanilla versions of the Windows products installed under a virtual machine without any patching. The truth is Microsoft already patched all of the NSA exploits months ago, and some of them a little bit more frequently, but the majority of them were patched in advance, which raises the question, how did Microsoft even know about the vulnerabilities in the first place? Now, I'll be the first to say that Microsoft is not responsible for putting these vulnerabilities in. I've seen a lot of tinfoil hat conspiracy theories flying around that Microsoft actually puts backdoors in the software so that the NSA can purposefully use those backdoors. And I'm gonna put that to rest right now. Microsoft doesn't purposefully put in any backdoors in their product, and I'm gonna tell you why. It's because Microsoft exposes their source code to the governments of several countries, including the United States, the European Union, Russia, even, if you could believe that. Russia has even had access and privilege to look at the Microsoft source code, and even China. Now, the reason that the Microsoft source code is available to those countries is because Microsoft wants to sell their software to those governments. Governments use massive amounts of software and massive amounts of licensing, and it is a huge chunk of the profits and revenues for a company like Microsoft. So Microsoft is quick to give source code access to those government agencies, especially our domestic US government agencies like the NSA, the CIA, etc., etc. This is not an uncommon practice. But if you even want to take it one step deeper, how do people get a hold of the source code to find these vulnerabilities in the first place? Well, you can find a lot of the Microsoft source code for past products and current products on Usenet and other anonymous systems like Tor, where people and internal employees at the company actually leaked the source code onto the internet for people to find. But the thing is nobody can compile the Windows source code because the system that's required to put it all together and make a cohesive product is so damn sophisticated and spaghetti coded that Microsoft kind of has their own built-in security around people building their own versions of the operating system. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't build renegade components using access to that source code and distribute those as like viruses, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about that. But let's just assume at this point that even though Microsoft isn't officially open source, a lot of people have access to the source code outside of Microsoft. Now, that leads me to talking about two different types of testing that are used to find exploits in an operating system. One of them is black box, and that's where you know nothing about the source code or the internal workings of the operating system, and you basically just keep throwing crap at it until it breaks, and then figure out how to get it to break in a controllable method that you can then exploit to run some code on that machine or give you a higher level of access. Now, the type of testing that's being used to find these exploits like the NSA has is called Whitebox Testing, and that is where the NSA gains access to the entire Microsoft source code legally, mind you. At least I believe it's still legally, but when I worked at Microsoft, we had an initiative to go through and clean up the entire source code to pull out any derogatory variable names, any comments that had cursing in them. We had to do a huge cleaning effort, and the reason for that cleaning effort was because the US government said that they would not run the Windows software unless they could analyze the entire source code for threat analysis, since these systems are used in very sensitive areas. So the government basically has their own army of developers that look over the source code looking for potential ways to exploit it. Now, that brings us to the NSA. The NSA absolutely has the developers and the source code to find these vulnerabilities, and they obviously did find the vulnerabilities. Now, here's where stuff gets a little dicey, and you guys might say that this is conspiracy and tinfoil hat, and for the interest of black helicopters not coming and blowing my house up, I'm gonna say that this is just my own personal opinion and not the views of Microsoft or any government agency. This is just my conspiracy theory here, is that the NSA is not going to turn over exploits that they find in the source code during their threat analysis unless they are so gaping that the NSA can't protect themselves against it in the first place. And what I mean is, all of the exploits that were found here could all be prevented with firewall rules, which means the NSA doesn't need Microsoft to fix it to deploy that software in their enterprise. They just need to have a firewall to prevent anybody from getting to that exploit. And then by them keeping that exploit close to their chest, when Russia in China and any other country that the CIA wants to perform surveillance on, and let's be honest, even the US, because we know the government loves to spy on its own citizens. And if Microsoft happens to find the exploit and fix it, well, so be it. Then they move on and analyze the source code and continue to find more and more ways to exploit the operating system. It's not hard when you have the source code. It's very easy to look for things, potential places where somebody didn't do the right checks for memory addressing and stuff like that, where you can do a targeted assault and gain a higher elevation of access or remotely execute code. One of the most common methods is called a buffer overrun, and you can go look that up on Google or Bing to your heart's content. So the other question that's raised is, how did Microsoft know to fix these vulnerabilities months ago when the shadow brokers are just now setting the tools free to everybody? That doesn't make a lot of sense, because usually the hacker groups, when they obtain this data, they'll sit on it for a little bit of a period of time, but they still want to release it while it's useful because they want to cause as much havoc as they can everywhere. But the other method that hackers use is to try to extort money. So one of my theories here is that the hacker group shadow brokers themselves contacted Microsoft, made them aware that they obtained the NSA toolset, and turned it over to Microsoft for a fee. Microsoft has in the past paid hackers a fee to show them how they penetrated their system so that they can then fix it. So this is to them no different. You could call it negotiating with terrorists, but let's just say that Microsoft paid for it, and that would explain why they're not citing the source of the exploit in the fixes themselves that they documented online. Now, the other potential theory here is that the NSA themselves realized that their system was compromised and that they leaked this data, and then they immediately told Microsoft, listen, we had tools that exploited these vulnerabilities. You guys need to patch these as soon as possible, because the NSA didn't want foreign entities to get a hold of these tools and use them against their own government or own country. That's probably the most plausible thing in my mind, is that the NSA simply fessed up. And then the third theory is that Microsoft employees themselves were a part of underground threads and on Usenet and places where people were bragging about these leaks and these tools, and somehow obtained the tools through those paths and then made them known to their management at Microsoft, in which case Microsoft wouldn't cite the source because it came from an internal employee, and they also didn't want to admit to their employees actually looking at nefarious forums and doing criminal activity online to try to obtain these types of tools. But at any rate, I'm going to go on record right now saying that I do not believe that Microsoft had any knowledge of these exploits until somebody brought it to their attention. I do not believe that Microsoft put these in as backdoors. I don't believe that Microsoft purposefully built in these flaws into the operating system so that the NSA and CIA could take control of them. And the main reason why I believe that to be true is because Microsoft has also given the source code to other countries. The EU, for instance, has access to the source code because they're doing threat analysis and other investigations on it. And Microsoft has freely turned over that access to them. And it would stand to reason that if they had good developers, they would be able to find the same exploits that the NSA did. And that would create a huge problem if in the end Microsoft was trying to keep this a domestic thing and was working with the NSA, which I believe that they were not. So the bigger problem here is that Microsoft source code is actually easy to come by for old products, and it can be come by depending on if you're with a government agency that's working with Microsoft directly for the latest products like Windows 10 and Server 2016, for instance. And once you have that source code, it makes it very easy to go through and find potentially exploitable code. Whereas with black box testing, where you know nothing, it's very difficult to find an exploit. And even if you do find an exploit, it's usually just crashing the computer, and it takes a lot more skill to be able to exploit it in a meaningful way to execute code, which is the ultimate end goal here. So to sum things up, your computer probably isn't at risk as long as you have Windows Update and you're running Windows 7 or later operating system and you have all of the updates in place. Chances are you're not vulnerable. There are a lot of people out there that this exploit is still going to take advantage of, and the tools are compiled, meaning that they're simple to use, and that any script kiddie that can get their hands on it, any like teenager that's just bored at home for the weekend that doesn't want to go on an Easter egg hunt, can just start randomly targeting IP addresses with these tools and remotely executing code and causing problems for people that don't have patch systems. So I want to tell everybody right now, make sure that you go into your Windows Update control panel and install every update that's currently available, and dare I say it, even the creators update, which I'm not too happy with. Also, another thing I would like to talk about very briefly is I recently did a video on the privacy issues surrounding Windows 10 and how Windows 10 is sending a lot of telemetry to Microsoft that includes a lot of data you probably didn't realize is going to them, and also personally identifiable data that could be used to link those data sources back to you individually. Now, I created a whole video on that. It's also linked down in the video description. I also have a petition linked that I would like you to go and sign if you want private privacy on your computer, because Microsoft allows the enterprise users running the enterprise SKU of the operating system to disable all of telemetry, but they have not provided that option to the consumer versions of the operating system because they want to force us to send this massive amount of telemetry and information to them. And I wholeheartedly believe that not all of this information is used to make the software better. A lot of this information could be leveraged for marketing research, targeted advertisement, and above all else, if you're involved in some kind of a criminal investigation or case, this data could be subpoenaed and linked with other databases like your cell providers and other government databases to further link data together to potentially incriminate you. And these are things I know a lot of people do not want. So please make sure, if privacy is an issue for you, go sign that petition. If it isn't an issue for you, still I urge you to sign the petition, because why not have an off option for the people that really want it? And you can still have the full option that sends every URL that you're going to, everything you type into search, every file name you type, every file name you open, every app you open. If you don't care that Microsoft knows all that about you on your desktop or laptop computer, that's fine. Don't sign the petition. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make this video to dispel all of the fake news going around that these exploits are still active on large majority of the computers. You're probably not going to have any kind of problem with your Windows updates installed. And I'm fairly certain that Microsoft probably has a little bit of a fishy backstory on how they were able to get a hold of the exploits that were leaked from the NSA and how they fixed them. But at the end of the day, you need to assume that Microsoft has given the source code to all of the government agencies that they're working with. You have to assume that the source code has been leaked by internal employees to the internet, because I will tell you right now, when I worked at Microsoft, the source repository where they stored Windows could be sunk under these things called lab accounts, which nobody owns. They're like decentralized accounts that are used for testing. And those test accounts could sync the source code, thereby removing any fingerprint back to any employee, and then simply copied to a drive and walked off the campus. There was absolutely no measures in place at Microsoft to protect the source code on a level that would prevent an employee from leaking it externally. Even when I was working there were several mail threads that went around about potential leaks where they were finding internal file shares that were exposed via dying DNS using an incoming link instead of an outgoing one to defeat the firewall to leak internal source code, internal tools, internal stuff. Hell, there was even an MP3 server hosted on the Redmond campus that was one of the biggest pirated audio collections on earth that was exposed to externally so that the employees could go home and even use it. And Microsoft was not aware of this. I want to make that crystal clear. These were employees creating these things and hosting them. So I just want you guys to know that all of the source code that's inside of Microsoft does have the potential to be available to any hacker on the planet if they try hard enough, or they can get a hold of the right employee, or they have enough money. So never assume that the software is 100% secure. And that's another reason why I don't want Microsoft storing all of my private telemetry data on their servers, because if their operating system can be exploited on this level and the NSA can find these kind of exploits, what's stopping the NSA from finding an exploit to get into their enterprise and pull data from their SQL servers, including personal data that you might have posted in there? Like if you typed your social security number in as a file name, for instance. I know it's not a smart idea, but let's say you did that and it actually went up and got linked to your data. Those types of things would be leaked, and it could cause you a lot of problems. So again, Microsoft, I want an off option for that telemetry. Please sign the petition down below. And guys, don't worry about this latest round of exploits. If you see the word shadow brokers, just ignore it as long as you have the latest Windows updates installed. It's just another tactic by all the news agencies to scare the crap out of everybody. And even I myself retweeted it this morning on Twitter, but I was smart enough to listen to people and go do more research. And that's why I'm telling you guys that there's nothing to fear. But I wanted to create a video telling you guys all of the potential scenarios here, how the NSA was able to create these tools, how Microsoft wasn't aware of them and then suddenly was aware of them. A lot of this could be considered theoretical because, again, I don't have absolute evidence showing any of this. But from my knowledge of how the source code can circulate and my involvement in cleaning the source code in preparation for the government to look at it, over 10 or 15 years ago, I'm going to have to say that it's incredibly plausible that the NSA found all of these leaks without any of Microsoft's help, and they just simply did not tell Microsoft because they wanted to keep these avenues of entry open for surveillance against other computers. We're talking about the NSA here, guys. They've done far worse things than try to exploit some random TCP port with a buffer overflow to pull files off your computer. But at the end of the day, guys, your firewall is your best line of defense. Make sure that your firewall is configured so you can't have any incoming connections to your box that you don't specifically know about on ports that you trust. And if you take those measures, then it doesn't matter how many of these exploits are in the operating system, nobody will have a chance to get to them. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. Also consider subscribing. Most of my content revolves around 3D printing, making stuff, gaming, programming tutorials. I know they haven't been out for a while, but Nerdgasm is coming back, and a lot of other stuff. If it's nerdy, it's going to be on this channel. And also, if you want to keep in the know about what's going on with Microsoft and my personal views and opinion as somebody who has been deep inside of that system, I would love to keep making these videos for you guys, but I need to know about it down below. All right, guys, I'm going to get started on my next video, which is making fidget spinners on a awesome 3D carving machine from Inventables. All right, guys, take it easy. Till next time.